A newlywed couple had been married for 3 months when the wife went for a checkup. The doctor gave her great news. She was pregnant. But there was a catch. Due to a rare complication, she had to avoid intimacy until after the baby was born. She went home and broke the news to her husband. He agreed to be patient, but after a month, he was struggling. One evening, he begged her to reconsider. Feeling bad for him, the wife handed him $100 and said, "I know this is tough for you. Here, take this and find a professional to relieve yourself." The husband was touched by her understanding. He pocketed the money and headed out, feeling lighter already. On his way down, he ran into the neighbor's wife, who noticed his cheerful mood. "Why so happy?" she asked. He explained everything, and she grinned. "Why go out? Give me the $100 and I'll take care of you." Seeing the logic in it, he agreed, handed over the cash, and spent 20 enjoyable minutes with her before heading back upstairs. His wife was surprised. "Wow, that was quick. What happened?" He smiled. "I ran into the neighbor's wife, and she said she'd do it for the money instead, so I went with her." His wife's face turned red. "That ungrateful cow. When she was pregnant, I did her husband for free." One morning, a woman got out of bed, stretched, and plop, a penny fell out of her privates. She frowned but shrugged it off and went about her morning routine. As she put on a pot of coffee, clink, a nickel dropped to the floor. Now she was getting a little worried, but she continued on. After finishing her coffee, she went to brush her teeth when, tank, a dime fell out. At this point, she was seriously concerned. "If one more thing happens, I'm calling the doctor," she thought. Sure enough, as she tidied up the house, clatter, a quarter rolled down her leg. Panicked, she grabbed the phone and told her doctor everything. A penny, a nickel, a dime, and then a quarter. The doctor chuckled and said, "Relax, you're just going through the change." Newlywed Liam visits Father Charles, looking troubled. "Father, I need to talk to you." The priest nods. "Is it a confession, my son?" "No, Father, just something I need to understand." Father Charles leads him to a quiet room and gestures for him to speak. "Father, why do women try to change men after marriage? My friends keep teasing me about it." The priest chuckles knowingly. "Ha, Liam, my son, let me explain. When a bride walks down the aisle, 3 things captivate her: the aisle itself, the altar, and the hymn being sung. Aisle, altar, hymn, aisle, altar, hymn, aisle, altar, hymn. And by the time she reaches the groom, the words are already ingrained in her mind. I'll alter him." At the turn of the 20th century, a wealthy society lady rushes into an employment agency in a panic. "I need a maid immediately. My dinner party is tonight, and my maid just quit." The agent sighs. "I only have girls fresh off the boat from Ireland. They're untrained." Desperate, the lady waves a hand. "Fine, I'll train her myself. Just send me someone." Molly, a young Irish girl, steps forward and agrees to take the job. That evening, the dinner party goes smoothly, though some guests seem to disappear from time to time. Still, Molly does a wonderful job. The next morning, as the lady strolls through the upstairs hall, she spots Molly in a guest room, standing over the bed, frozen. Curious, she steps inside and peers over Molly's shoulder, only to see a condom lying on the sheets. Her face turns bright red, but she forces a laugh. "Oh, Molly, surely you have those in Ireland?" Molly gulps and replies, "Aye, madam, but we don't skin meat." A nun, desperate to use the restroom, walked into a crowded Hooters. The place was buzzing with music and laughter, and every so often the lights would go out, each time followed by loud cheers from the patrons. As the nun stepped inside, the room fell completely silent. Ignoring the stare, she approached the bartender. "Excuse me, may I use your restroom?" she asked politely. The bartender nodded. "Of course, but I should warn you, there's a statue of a naked man in there wearing only a fig leaf." The nun waved a hand dismissively. "That's fine, I'll just look the other way." The bartender led her to the restroom, and after a few minutes, she emerged. The moment she stepped back into the bar, the entire place erupted into applause. Baffled, she turned to the bartender. "I don't understand. Why is everyone cheering for me?" The bartender chuckled. "Well, sister, now they know you're one of us." "I beg your pardon?" she asked, frowning. The bartender grinned. You see, every time someone lifts the fig leaf, the lights go out. Now, about that drink. A woman comes home beaming and tells her husband, remember those headaches I've had for years? They're gone. No more headaches? That's amazing, he says. What happened? Margie recommended a hypnotist, she explains. He told me to stand in front of a mirror, stare at myself, and repeat, I do not have a headache. I do not have a headache. And you know what? It worked. That's incredible, the husband exclaims. Then his wife adds, so you haven't exactly been setting the bedroom on fire these last few years. Maybe the hypnotist could help with that, too? A little hesitant, the husband agrees and visits the hypnotist. A few days later, he comes home, rips off his clothes, scoops up his wife, and carries her into the bedroom. He lays her down and says, don't move, I'll be right back. He rushes to the bathroom, comes back a few minutes later, and makes love to her like never before. His wife, breathless, gasps, wow, that was incredible. Don't move, he says again. I'll be right back. He dashes back into the bathroom, returns, and round two is even better. His wife, dizzy with pleasure, can barely speak. Oh, my God. Once again, he says, don't move. I'll be right back, and runs to the bathroom. Curious, his wife quietly follows him and sees him standing in front of the mirror, chanting, she's not my wife. She's not my wife. She's not my wife. She's not my wife. His funeral will be held on Saturday. A man boarded a plane and settled into his seat. As he got comfortable, he noticed an incredibly beautiful woman stepping onto the plane. His heart raced when he realized she was heading straight for his row. Sure enough, she took the seat right beside him. Trying to play it cool, he smiled and asked, business or pleasure? She returned his smile. Business. I'm heading to the annual Sexual Studies Convention in Chicago. He nearly choked on his breath. A stunning woman sitting right next to him, and she was attending a conference about sex. Struggling to stay composed, he asked, oh, and what's your role there? I'm a lecturer, she said. I share fascinating research on human sexuality. Really? He gulped. Like what? She leaned in slightly. Well, for example, studies show that Native American men are the most passionate lovers. Jewish men are the best at fully satisfying a woman. And surprisingly, Southern rednecks have the greatest stamina. She suddenly blushed and laughed. I probably shouldn't be discussing this with a stranger. I don't even know your name. The man extended his hand with a grin. Tonto Goldstein, ma'am, but my friends call me Bubba. Frank takes his blind date, Heather, to an amusement park. To keep things fair, they agree to take turns picking activities. What do you want to do first? Frank asks. I want to get weighed, Heather replies. A little puzzled, but wanting to be polite, Frank leads her to the weight guesser. Let me guess, the weight guesser says. You weigh 128 pounds? Close, off by 2, Heather says cheerfully. She steps on the scale, 130 pounds. After that, they ride the Ferris wheel. When they get off, Frank asks, okay, your turn again. What's next? I want to get weighed. Frank blinks. Wait, but we already did that. No, we didn't. Yes, we did. No, we didn't. Confused but not wanting to argue, Frank takes her back to the weight guesser. Let me guess. The man sighs. 130 pounds. Heather steps on. Yep, still 130. This bizarre pattern repeats throughout the night. Frank suggests a ride. Heather insists on getting weighed again. And again. And again. By the time the date ends, Frank is exhausted and frustrated. He drops Heather off at home, where her roommate Lisa greets her. So, how was your date? Lisa asks. Heather sighs dramatically. Oh, it was wame and woozy. A young woman feeling completely hopeless after being rejected by her lover and unemployed heads to the Manhattan docks with the intent of ending her life. Alone and broken, she stands at the edge, ready to jump. Just as she's about to leap, a handsome sailor shouts, "Stop! Don't do it!" Startled, she turns to him. "I have nothing left. What's the point of living?" she cries. He steps closer. "Listen," he says. "I know life's tough, but you can't throw it all away just like that. I'm leaving for Europe tomorrow on a ship. I know a guy who works the docks, and I can help you get aboard. We'll start fresh there. We can make a new life together." Touched by his words, she agrees. Later that night, he sneaks her aboard one of the lifeboats below deck. He gives her food, a blanket, and promises to return every night. For 3 weeks, she hides there, and each night he brings her a sandwich. They talk, laugh, and make passionate love until the dawn. But one day, while the captain is inspecting the lower decks, he hears a rustling noise. He lifts the tarp of the lifeboat and finds her, trembling in fear. "What on earth are you doing here?" the captain demands. She explains nervously. "I'm a stowaway. One of the sailors made a deal with me. He sneaks me food and lets me hide here until we get to Europe." The captain raises an eyebrow. And, well, he's been screwing me." The captain chuckles. "Lady, this is the Staten Island ferry." A farmer took his truck in for repairs, but the mechanic said it would take a while. Since he didn't live far, the farmer decided to walk home. On his way, he stopped at the hardware store and bought a bucket and a gallon of paint. Then he went to the feed store and picked up 2 chickens and a goose. Now, carrying all this stuff, he found himself in a bit of a predicament. As he stood there, scratching his head, an elderly lady approached him, looking a bit lost. "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to 1603 Mockingbird Lane?" she asked. "Well," the farmer replied, "my farm is close to that. I'd walk you there, but I've got a bit of a problem carrying all this." The lady thought for a moment and then said, "Why don't you put the can of paint in the bucket, carry the bucket in one hand, tuck a chicken under each arm, and carry the goose in the other hand?" "Great idea," the farmer said, and started on his way, walking the lady home. As they passed through an alley, he suggested, "Let's take this shortcut. We'll get there faster." The lady looked him up and down cautiously. "I'm a lonely widow without a husband to protect me. How do I know when we get in this alley you won't try something inappropriate?" The farmer, taken aback, replied, "Lady, I'm carrying a bucket, a gallon of paint, 2 chickens, and a goose. How could I possibly hold you up against the wall and do anything like that?" The old woman smiled slyly and said, "Well, if you were to do something like that, you'd set the goose down, cover it with the bucket, put the paint on top, and I'd hold the chickens." At a crowded bus stop, a young woman, dressed in a tight leather miniskirt, matching leather boots, and a jacket, was waiting for the bus. As it pulled up, she went to step on, but quickly realized her skirt was too tight to lift her leg high enough for the first step. A little embarrassed, she flashed the bus driver a quick smile and unzipped her skirt just a little, thinking it would give her enough room. She tried again, but still couldn't make the step. Feeling more awkward, she unzipped the skirt a bit further, giving it another shot. Again, she was unable to lift her leg. At this point, she gave the driver a coy smile and unzipped it even more. But once again, she couldn't quite make it onto the bus. Just then, a big Texan behind her stepped forward, picked her up easily, and placed her gently on the bus step. Furious, she spun around and yelled, "How dare you touch me? I don't even know you." The Texan drawled, "Well, ma'am, I usually would agree with you, but after you unzipped my fly 3 times, I figured we were friends." When I was 13, I dreamt of having a beautiful girlfriend with big breasts. By 16, I had one, but there was no passion. So I decided I needed someone with a zest for life. In college, I found a passionate girl, but she was too emotional. Everything was an emergency. She was always angry and threatened to suicide. I decided I needed stability. At 25, I found a stable girl, but she was boring. She was so predictable that life became dull, so I realized I needed someone exciting. By 28, I found an exciting girl, but I couldn't keep up with her. She was always rushing from one thing to another, doing crazy things and making me just as miserable as happy. She was fun at first, but directionless. So I thought, I need someone with ambition. At 30, I found a smart, ambitious woman with her feet firmly planted on the ground, so I married her. She was so ambitious, she divorced me and took everything I owned. Now I'm older and wiser, and still looking for a beautiful girlfriend with big breasts. 4 old-timers were playing their weekly game of golf. One of them remarked how nice it would be to wake up on Christmas morning, roll out of bed, and without any arguments, go directly to the golf course, meet his buddies, and play a round. His friends all agreed. "Let's do it." We'll make it a priority. Figure out a way to meet here early on Christmas morning. Months later, that special morning arrives, and they're all there on the golf course. The first guy says, "Boy, this game cost me a fortune. I bought my wife a diamond ring that she can't take her eyes off of." The second guy says, "I spent a ton, too. My wife is at home planning the cruise I gave her. She's up to her eyeballs in brochures." The third guy says, "Well, my wife is at home admiring her new car, reading the manual." They all turned to the last guy, who was staring at them like they had lost their minds. "I can't believe you all went to such expense for this golf game," he says. "I just slapped my wife on the bum and said, 'Well, babe, Merry Christmas. It's a great morning, golf course or intercourse.' She said, 'Don't forget your hat.'" Not too long ago, a woman decided to test how her husband would react if she left without telling him where she was going. So she wrote him a letter saying she was tired of him and didn't want to live with him anymore. After writing it, she placed the letter on the table in the bedroom and then crawled under the bed to hide. When her husband finally came home, he saw the letter on the table and read it. After a brief pause, he picked up the pen, added something to the letter, and then began to get changed. Whistling happy tunes, he sang and danced as he dressed. He grabbed his phone, dialed a number, and started chatting. "Hey, babe, I'm just changing clothes, then I'll join you," he said. As for the other fool, she finally figured out I've been fooling around on her and left. "I was really wrong to have married her. I wish we'd met earlier. See you soon, honey." After hanging up, he walked out of the room. Distraught, she crawled out from under the bed, tears in her eyes, and stumbled over to read what her unfaithful husband had written at the end of the letter. Through blurry eyes, she read, "I could see your feet, you idiot. I'm just going out to buy some bread." On her first day at a new office, a blonde woman was given the task of setting up her computer. Hours passed, and her boss was impressed by how focused she seemed, sitting in front of the screen for a solid 11 hours. At the end of the day, the boss approached her and asked, "Hey, you seem to have worked so hard today. What were you working on?" The blonde woman, with a proud smile, replied, "Well, I spent the entire day fixing the keyboard. It took a while, but I finally got all the ABCs back in the right order." "Last night, my wife demanded I take her somewhere expensive, so I took her to a gas station. And that's when the fight started. After retiring, I went to the Social Security office to apply. The clerk asked for my ID, but I had forgotten my wallet. She said, 'Unbutton your shirt.' Confused, I did, and she nodded at my silver chest hair. 'That's proof enough,' she said, and processed my application. Excited, I told my wife about it when I got home. She said, 'You should have dropped your pants. You might have gotten disability, too.' And that's when the fight started. At my high school reunion, I kept staring at a drunken woman slumped over at a nearby table. My wife asked, 'Do you know her?' 'Yeah,' I sighed. 'She's my old girlfriend. I heard she started drinking right after we broke up, and she's never been sober since.' My wife shook her head. 'Wow. Who knew someone could celebrate that long?' And that's when the fight started. I took my wife to a nice restaurant. The waiter took my order first. 'I'll have the strip steak, medium rare.' He asked, 'Aren't you worried about the mad cow?' 'Nah, she can order for herself.' And that's when the fight started. My wife stood in front of the mirror, frowning. 'I feel old, fat, and ugly,' she said. 'I really need you to give me a compliment.' I replied, 'Well, your eyesight's darn near perfect.' And that's when the fight started. I tried to talk my wife into buying a case of Miller Lite for $14.95. Instead, she bought a jar of cold cream for $7.95. I told her, 'The beer would make you look better at night than the cold cream.' And that's when the fight started. My wife asked, 'Does this dress make my butt look big?' I said, 'Not as much as the one you wore yesterday.' And that's when the fight started. A man and woman were sleeping peacefully when, at 3 a.m., a loud noise came from outside. The woman jolted awake, panicked. 'Holy crap! That must be my husband!' Her lover jumped out of bed, ran naked to the window, and leaped out. He crashed onto the ground, bolted through a thorn bush, and sprinted to his car. A few minutes later, he returned, stormed into the bedroom, and yelled, "I am your husband." She blinked and said, "Then why were you running?" And that's when the fight started. Saturday morning, I got up early, dressed quietly, packed my gear, and slipped into the garage. I hitched the boat to the truck and backed out, right into a torrential downpour. The wind howled at 50 miles per hour. Defeated, I pulled back in, undressed, and climbed back into bed, cuddling up to my wife. "The weather's terrible out there," I whispered. She mumbled, "Can you believe my idiot husband is out fishing in this?" And that's when the fight started. I asked my wife, "Where do you want to go for our anniversary?" Her face lit up. "Somewhere I haven't been in a long time." I smiled. "How about the kitchen?" And that's when the fight started. My wife and I were watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in bed. I turned to her and asked, "Do you want to have sex?" She replied, "No." I asked, "Is that your final answer?" Without looking at me, she said, "Yes." So I said, "Then I'd like to phone a friend." And that's when the fight started. Mr. Jacobs, the biology instructor at a posh suburban girls' junior college, asked during class, "Miss Arnold, could you please name the organ of the human body that, under the appropriate conditions, expands to 6 times its normal size and define those conditions?" Miss Arnold gasped, then replied coldly, "Mr. Jacobs, I don't think that's an appropriate question to ask me. I assure you my parents will hear about this." She sat down red-faced. Unfazed, Mr. Jacobs called on Miss Jones and asked her the same question. Miss Jones, with composure, responded that would be the pupil of the eye, under conditions of dim light. "Correct," said Mr. Jacobs. "And now, Miss Arnold, I have 3 things to say to you. 1, you haven't studied your lesson. 2, you have a dirty mind. And 3, someday you'll be faced with dreadful disappointment." 3 women, 1 engaged, 1 married, and 1 a mistress, were chatting about their relationships and decided to spice up their love lives. They all agreed to wear black leather bras, stiletto heels, and a mask over their eyes that evening when they saw their respective partners. A few days later, they met up for lunch to compare notes. The engaged woman said, "The other night when my boyfriend came over, I had on the black leather bodice, tall stilettos, and a mask. He saw me, smiled, and said, 'You are the woman of my life. I love you.' Then we made love all night long. The mistress said, 'Me too.' The other night I met my lover at his office wearing the leather bodice, heels, mask, and a raincoat. When I opened the raincoat, he didn't say a word, but we had wild fun all night." The married woman said, "I sent the kids to my mom's house for the night. When my husband came home, I was wearing the leather bodice, black stockings, stilettos, and a mask. As soon as he walked in and saw me, he said, 'What's for dinner, Batman?'" Woman's Diary, Saturday, the 28th of July. I saw him this evening, and he was acting so strangely. I'd been out shopping with the girls, so I was running a little late meeting up with him, but I thought that was probably the reason. The bar was packed and noisy, so I suggested we head somewhere quieter to talk. He seemed off, still distant and distracted, so I thought maybe a nice dinner would lift his spirits. But even through dinner, he was just not himself. He barely laughed, and it felt like he wasn't even listening to me. Something was definitely wrong. Afterwards, he dropped me off at home, and I wondered if he'd come in. He hesitated, but followed me inside. I asked him what was going on, but he just gave me a half-hearted shake of the head and turned on the TV. We sat in silence for a while, and I finally told him I was heading to bed. I wrapped my arms around him, telling him how much I loved him. He sighed and gave me this sad, empty smile. He didn't follow me upstairs right away, but eventually he came up, and to my surprise, we made love. Yet he still seemed distant, like he was somewhere else entirely. I cried myself to sleep, wondering if he was planning to leave me. Maybe he's met someone else. Man's Diary, Saturday, the 28th of July. My team lost today. What a bummer. At least I got some A man was walking along a beach in California when he stumbled upon an old lamp. Curious, he picked it up and gave it a rub. Out popped a genie who groaned, all right, you freed me from the lamp, blah, blah, blah. This is the 4th time this month, and I'm getting a little tired of granting wishes. You only get one." The man thought for a moment, then said, "I've always wanted to visit Hawaii, but I'm terrified of flying, and I get seasick really easily. Could you build me a bridge to Hawaii so I can drive there instead?" The genie chuckled and said, "Are you serious? Do you have any idea how impossible that is? Do you know how deep the Pacific is? How would the supports even reach the bottom? Think about the concrete and steel it would take. No, think of another wish." The man agreed, mulling it over for a bit. Finally, he said, "All right, here's my wish. I've been married and divorced 4 times. My ex-wives always said I'm insensitive, that I don't care enough. So I wish I could understand women, understand how they feel, why they give me the silent treatment, why they cry, what they really mean when they say nothing, and most importantly, how to make them truly happy." The genie stared at him for a moment before responding. "So you want that bridge to be 2 lanes or 4? A widower, upon retiring, bought a house near a local high school. The first few weeks of his retirement were peaceful, but then the new school year began. One afternoon, early into the semester, 3 boys walked down the street, happily banging on every trash bin they passed. They did the same thing the next day and the day after that, and so on for a week. Finally, the man decided it was time to take action. The next afternoon, he stepped outside and met the boys as they approached, clanging their way down the street. He stopped them and said, "You kids are a lot of fun. In fact, I used to do the same thing when I was your age. How about I give you each $1 if you promise to keep doing it?" The boys, thrilled by the offer, eagerly agreed and continued their noisy antics. A few days later, the man came out again, but this time with a sad smile. "This recession is really hitting my income. From now on, I can only pay you 50 cents each." The boys were disappointed, but kept on banging the bins, albeit a bit less excited. A few days later, the man approached them again, saying, "I'm afraid things have gotten worse. I can only afford to pay you 25 cents each now." The leader of the group, clearly irritated, threw up his hands and exclaimed, "That's it? You think we're going to keep banging trash bins for 25 cents? You must be out of your mind. We're quitting." And with that, the man enjoyed peace and quiet for the rest of his days. 2 guys grow up together, but after college, one moves to New York and the other to Washington. They agree to meet every 10 years in Florida for a round of golf and to catch up. At age 32, they meet, finish their round, and head to lunch. Where do you want to go? Hooters. Why Hooters? They've got servers with big boobs, tight shorts, and gorgeous legs. You're on. At age 42, they meet again. After golf, one asks, "Where to for lunch?" Hooters. Again, why? They've got cold beer, big screens, and side action on the games. Okay. At age 52, they meet and play golf again. Where to for lunch? Hooters. Why? The food's pretty good, and there's plenty of parking. All right. At age 62, after their round, one asks, "Where to?" Hooters. Why? Wings are half price and the food isn't too spicy. Good choice. At age 72, they meet again. After golf, one says, "Where to for lunch?" Hooters. Why? They've got 6 handicap parking spots right by the door and senior discounts. Perfect. At age 82, they meet again. After golf, one asks, "Where should we go for lunch?" Hooters. Why? Because we've never been there before. Okay, let's give it a try. On a hot afternoon, Scrooge the miser and his grandson Tim were walking home from a party. Tim groaned, "Gramps, it's still a long way back to the house. It's so hot and I'm tired. Look, there's a bus stop here. Can we please take the bus home?" Scrooge gasped. $6 for a bus ride. What a waste of money. We'll walk." Tim sighed but said nothing. They walked a little farther when Scrooge suddenly spotted a passing taxi. He waved it down and asked, "How much for a ride to Springfield Avenue?" "About $20, said the cab driver. $20? That's outrageous." Scrooge scoffed. "We'll walk. Thank you, but no." As the cab drove off, Tim, now thoroughly exasperated, turned to his grandfather. "Gramps, did you really think a taxi ride would cost less than a bus?" "Of course not, you fool," Scrooge replied. "But by not taking the bus, we're saving $6, and by not taking the taxi, we're saving 20? Tim stared at him. "Gramps, you're saving money. But you're also making us walk all day. How much are we saving on that? Oh, Scrooge smiled. Every step is another penny saved, Tim.